But I'm actually quite excited by the numbers here and the dynamism in the discussion. I'm certainly also very keen not to be part of the good losers club, which is what some in the Greens and environment groups used to sort of talk about. It's very important that we focus on a vision of a good and just life. It's certainly been something that's been why I've done what I've done for 20 years and worked in independent politics, with the environment movement, with World Vision, and most recently here at the Climate Institute, which is an independent research organisation. I was asked to talk about climate politics, and it's part of a new and progressive agenda. For lots of ways, it's actually, climate politics is not necessarily new, nor necessarily progressive. I mean, the science is over a century old. We've got very important conservative strands, which have been important for environment gains generally as well abroad. And of course, we've had people like Rupert Murdoch and Malcolm Turnbull who channelled him more recently about giving the planet the benefit of the doubt. We've seen modern, if not progressive, conservatives determined not to let this agenda be dominated by the left, that range from Margaret Thatcher to Angela Merkel to David Cameron and even to Arnie Schwarzenegger, who's had a lot to do with my namesake. And in fact, back in the heady days in April 2007, there was a quote which we used to use a bit from Arnie, which said, to people who are opposing action on pollution and climate change, that your political base will melt away as surely as the polar ice caps, he said. I'm not even going to try the accent. You will become a political penguin on a smaller ice floe that is drifting out to sea. Goodbye, my little friend. That is what is going to happen. There you go, I did try. But of course, it didn't quite work out that way. Since then, we've lost arguably 2 prime ministers and 2 opposition leaders in the very complex world of climate politics. People continually ask me, why is it so difficult and why is it so different here in Australia? And I thought Tim Dixon was very interesting earlier, and I think it's very important that we need to be aware about the power relationships in which we work. Otherwise, we'll be condemned to, I think, what he described as naive disappointment. It's a fact that Australia is a high-carbon political economy. I'll bore people who were in my workshop earlier, but you know, we were settled with the convicts in 1788, and by 1800 we were exporting coal. It's deeply within our political establishment and within our cultural establishment, as it is in other countries, and perhaps notably the US and Canada as well. But here we've had a greenhouse mafia derail initiatives in actions in governments, from the Hawke government to the Keating government. We've had the life throttled out of any initiatives that did emerge through the Howard government until its very end. And we've had that establishment put a focus on fears that climate and clean energy policies were the thin edge of the wedge of communists who, having had the Berlin Wall fall down, saw this as a new way of throttling the life out of capitalism. And that's a favourite quote of Nick Minchin and some of the others, and I think even Erica Betts about that. Ironically, of course, in China, many of the hard and fast communists actually think that action on pollution and climate change is a conspiracy to throttle the life out of the communist revolution as well, and as a stalking horse of capitalism. So it's, which is actually a very important part of understanding that this is actually, there is a psychology of change here as well, and it's much easier to run fear campaigns and scare campaigns to maintain a status quo and to than it is to come up with the hard work of reform. And understanding that psychology of change is very important for people working on either what we might call a progressive agenda, or certainly something trying for action on pollution and climate change and sustainability. It's true that in the work we've had the life kicked out of us by some of the big polluters. We've also had our bums being kicked by a dad's army of denialists who've been fantastic at working and blogging in the blogging space, who've been out mobilising numbers to make the phones melt down in Liberal members and even many Labor members' rooms, and particularly that was the case when Turnbull's leadership became to be threatened. So it's very important, though, that we understand that there is that force out there, and we need to work about that. But it's also important to not overrate that as well. It's important to understand that there is a great fear of change in many communities, and particularly in Australia as well, and that there are a number of ways in which people avoid the challenges and seek to avoid, in particular, to face up to the hard realities of climate change that Professor Garneau says will haunt humanity throughout history if we don't act soon. People react by denying the fact that we can make much of a difference. So we hear this, Australia's just 1.5% of global pollution, why should we lead? So there's a couple of myths within that one in itself. We're 1.5%, but we're in about 15th globally in absolute terms. We're also at no risk of leading the world. There is substantial action going on around the world, and particularly in Europe and Asia. But people also grasp for small seeds of doubt in terms of the science and these things which threaten their life. So whilst there is only a very small number of scientists who even question or elements of climate change, they are grabbed hold of with both hands, because that means people don't have to change their way of life or the body politic. So that's a range of the threats in which we have to deal with. And how do we deal with this and get the momentum that's so crucially necessary for us to establish an agenda? It's true here in Australia that particularly here in Australia, the concern about climate change has come from the environmental movement. The Australian Conservation Foundation published concerns about this first in Habitat 1974. But it's also true it's important to get out of voices from just the environment movement. And I say that as someone who has worked in that movement. That's a movement, I think, that's had a number of challenges. Simon raised a couple there when he spoke about. Part of it also that it spoke, like many in the progressive sector, increasingly just to itself, into a cultural elite, if you like, the elite who reads the Fairfax papers and watches the ABC News, and needed to do more in reaching out more broadly. I think it's begun to do so, but it's still that challenge. It's also important to recognise that movement was marginalised by the media and political establishment, very keen, desperately keen to continue to reinforce the mean green meme. So much of this is about trying to take people back to the caves. To put on the hair shirts. So it's actually, it was important when in dealing with this that we build together strands of movements, strands of stories and strands of opportunities. The Climate Institute itself was established in 2005, partly to try and broker that. We are a think tank, a research organisation. We don't pretend to be part of the movement, but we certainly try to provide material that can be used or abused by the movement, and we get both. We've done work where we provide evidence-based research. We've done the economic modelling, which is unfortunately such a currency of the debate, but it has enabled us to challenge some of the other models that are so often used. We've done work that speak to the impacts of climate change, but also done work in terms of the opportunities of climate change, of taking action on climate change, the economic opportunities that are there. And this is a very important part, I think, that is about grappling with that high-carbon political economy. We actually have to help the low-carbon political economy emerge as well, and that may not always be with perfect companies, but it is certainly with some of those that see opportunities in this taking of action and are concerned that the Australian economy is at risk. And I thought the passage of the renewable energy target legislation was a great example, particularly the second wave, which tried to fix up a lot of the problems in 2009, was actually a very important moment, because we did see companies like Pacific Hydro and AGL start to actually say, we've got jobs at threat here. They used techniques that we've seen from the high carbon political economy, and something which we need to continue to foster. Climate Institute, we do work with a range of businesses, and we've got climate partners with Westpac, KPMG, AGL I've mentioned, GE, Pac Hydro. These are important partnerships that need to be built with business and with an emerging low carbon economy. But it's also very important to be dealing with the other alliances that are critical to make this change. To have a fast transition to a low carbon economy, we need it to be fair transition. And so, in our view, it's vital we roll the sleeves up and work with workers and with those affected, those less well off. And so we established something called the Southern Cross Climate Coalition, which is an alliance of ourselves, the ACTU, ACOS, and the Australian Conservation Foundation. And I think that did very important work in terms of driving policies and keeping a dialogue across those sectors about what was pragmatic but solid change. We sought to build alliances, and we worked with the faith community. We've helped set up the Australian Religious Response to Climate Change, and we hosted the Sydney office of the the Australian Youth Climate Coalition, and worked with GetUp in those days in 2007. But we also then had to go on after the election and work with the difficult political challenges that were around through 2009, and working, we did work and did ultimately back the carbon pollution reduction scheme. That was partly because we did put a premium on some bipartisan support there. We were anxious about the culture wars that we could descend into, and we have descended into since that time. So we've made a range of those hard and pragmatic choices. That didn't work well enough with those alliances and work well enough with yourselves and with others in the base. And that's something we're keen to address. We've been working hard since then, and in recent times we're establishing alliances again, not just in the Southern Cross Climate Coalition, but with GetUp, with Greenpeace, and with a number of groups which I think have shown some great maturity in recent times, and we're about to launch very soon some significant action working together. So that's a bit of a journey of the Climate Institute, but I think it's actually an important part of the journey that we all need to face in terms of looking at the political economy and looking at the challenges, but looking at who we need to work with. I am an optimist. I probably describe myself as a professional optimist. I want to focus on winning. I want to focus on the alliances that we need. I'm convinced that taking action on pollution and climate change can be a solutions multiplier. It can be very important about re-establishing a sense of community, re-establishing a link with nature, but also some greater solidarity with the poor, both here in Australia and abroad, as we build the solutions we need to do so. I think Australians are very keen to make a link and to move beyond just being treated as consumers or clients. They actually want to play a role of being citizens. We have to break the nexus of those that drive fear and drive division and drive people back simply to being consumers, and to play a proud role in a vibrant civic culture and as citizens in a progressive agenda. Thank you.